Thank you very much for being with us this afternoon. We're going to get started. The first item that we have is a public hearing on, it's the only public hearing this afternoon, is a public hearing on supplemental appropriation to the county government FY20 capital budget and amendment to FY19 through 24 CIP for the Office of Agriculture in the amount of $3,448,231 for agricultural land preservation easement. Action is scheduled immediately following the hearing. We have one speaker for this, Alfred Bartlett. Is Mr. Bartlett here? No? All right. Thank you. Do we have 5 people to vote on this? Yes, okay. Is there, we will close the public hearing. Is there a motion?
So moved. Second.
It's been moved by Councilmember Rice and seconded by Councilmember Navarro that we approve this. All those in favor, please signify by raising your hand. And opposed, it's unanimous by those present. The next item that we have is we're going to interview Michael Covio. I don't know if anybody else calls him Michael other than this statement, but we're going to do that because we're very formal here, very formal. And Mr. Klein, would you like to introduce Michael to us, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, members of the council, new member of the council. So I'm very pleased to be here to interview the county executive's nominee for Director of Finance, Mike Covio. For nearly a year, Mike has served as acting Director of Finance. In his 28 years with the department, Mike has had responsibility for multiple aspects of the county's fiscal management. Those include tax collection, debt and cash management, economic development, legislative analysis, project financing, and strategic planning. Mike brings expertise and continuity, which will serve us well in taking on the fiscal challenges ahead and maintaining our AAA bond rating. And with that, thank you for the opportunity to introduce him.
Well, thank you. And Mike, thank you. It's always good seeing you. We have a few questions, 5 total. Could you tell us about your professional background and how it relates to the specific responsibilities of the Department of Finance?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you for having me. And as you noted, I am Mike. When my mother's upset with me, I'm Michael, but usually I'm Mike with everybody else. I actually have been with the county not quite 28 years yet. I came from the State Budget Department in 1992, where I had been one of the 2 fiscal planners for the state. My career so far is almost 32 years of state budget and county finance work. At DBM, which was called DBFP, Department of Budget and Fiscal Planning, way back in the 80s and 90s, as a fiscal planner, I actually worked on revenues more than anything. We sort of backfilled what the Board of Revenue Estimates did. We were a check on the State Comptroller's Office and the Board of Revenue Estimates. We worked with them to make sure that everybody on the Board of Revenue Estimates and in the General Assembly understood where we were going with revenues. One of the big things that I worked on, other than the state aid to counties budget, which was about 1/3 of the state general fund budget back then, was the very large study on state taxes and tax structure, which came out in 1990. It was usually called the Lino's report, and it was a multi-part tome that was couple thousand pages long. I was one of the few researchers on it. I did a lot of the writing on that. So I've been conversant in tax policy. The Department of Finance here is the taxing authority for the county. I've been doing it for 32 years now. So that was my introduction to tax policy. I learned an awful lot working on the Lino's Commission report. I also learned a tremendous amount about county budgets doing the state aid budgets. Back then there were 50 state aid programs for state aid to the counties. And again, it was about 1/3 of the state's general fund budget. I left there in 1992 because one of the things that I did with the state aid budget was reduce the amount of time it took to do it from 3 to 4 months to 2 to 3 weeks. And I got bored, and I told the budget secretary that I was bored and I needed more work to do, and he said, Mike, I don't have any more work for you to do, so I left, and I came here. I came here to help with legislation, with doing fiscal notes. I developed the first fiscal note system for the county. It was a fax-based system originally, because that's what we had back then. Eventually, within a few years, it became a system based on emails and emailing spreadsheets. When I came to the county, that's the first thing that I worked on. I ended up doing all the special projects for the Department of Finance. Anything that didn't fit in any of the divisions within finance, I worked on. Anything that the county executive asked the Department of Finance to do that didn't really fit anywhere in particular, I ended up taking on. I did that for several years. I kept on doing legislation, state and local legislation, for several years, and kept on taking on new things like oversight of the Economic Development Fund. And eventually in 2008, I sort of transitioned to the next head of what is now the Division of Fiscal Management. I actually took over fiscal management when our chief at the time retired. I took over in 2011. Fiscal management, as you know, does all of the fiscal analysis for finance. It manages all the cash for the county. It manages the debt for the county. It does lots of other things also. In 2013, I was asked to go over to the Treasury Division to help with the implementation of a new tax assessment system. The tax assessment system is part of our property tax system, and we were moving from a mainframe system that was archaic and needed to be replaced to a new server-based SQL system. And so I helped manage the transition of that with our IT chief. And from there we went and we made lots more changes to the systems that we use in the Division of Treasury to bill and collect taxes, not just property taxes, but also excise taxes. So I had a lot more experience on all the taxes over the last 7 years. And at the end of March of last year, I was asked to become the acting finance director, and I've done that for the last year. If you've seen my resume, it lists everything, lists a lot of the things that the finance director does, so I won't bore you with that. But that's where I am now, and I believe that's where I hope to be going next also.
Thank you very much. I have a feeling you haven't been bored since you've been here. Let me just tell you. What do you see as the most important issues you will be addressing in the Department of Finance?
Sure. Well, I mean, there's a number of them. I'm going to just concentrate on a few of them, and some of them are related. In fact, they're all related because we're talking about revenues for the most part. We are overdue at reviewing all of our fiscal policies. We'll be looking at them over the next year. We will be making recommendations as to where our reserve policy and other policies should be. I'm not sure exactly where we're going to go with that at this point. We're going to be looking at best practices. You may know that Colorado Springs was assisted by the Government Finance Officers Association, GFOA, a couple years ago in order to sort of develop a system for, or a template, if you will, for putting together a proper reserve policy and to determine the proper amount of reserves. So we'll be talking about the current reserve policies that we have. We'll be talking about and writing on potential emergency reserves, things like that. But it won't be just reserve policies. It'll be other fiscal policies also. Hat in hand with that is the 10-year financial plan, which we started last summer. We continue to work on that. We're working collaboratively with folks from the outside, with lots of county employees, including council staff. Right now, we've been in a development mode for the last 2 months where we're putting together more information for the stakeholder groups that are part of the 10-year financial plan. apparatus, to give them more information so that they can help us make better decisions and put together a very robust plan for you all to take a look at. In addition, one of the things I started with is many years ago, 30-odd years ago, I figured out a way to reduce the workload for managing the state aid to counties budget, and I reduced it by a factor of roughly 5. And over the years, I've always looked for ways of making what we do more efficient and more effective and actually more accurate too. So if we can only type things in once or never and use data that's actually there already, then we make fewer mistakes. So I'm going to continue that. And in finance, we've been continuing it already anyway. We are leaders in RPA, robotic process automation. We've already automated several repetitive things that we do, such as tax refunds and things like that. Things that we couldn't do just a few years ago because the RPA applications actually weren't sophisticated enough to do what we needed them to do. We've worked with some of the systems over the last few years, and we have some that we can rely on that actually can actually help us with decision making. Not literally decision making, but it can actually look at data and determine whether it's a go or no go. And that's a huge boon to us. It's allowed us to sort of roll it out at MACO last summer. We had it in our booth at the MACO convention. I know the Department of Health and Human Services also uses RPA to become more efficient and less costly to the citizens of Montgomery County. Lastly, I'll just note that we're right in the middle of doing revenue estimates for the FY21 budget. We have been talking for the last 2 months about working more collaboratively with council staff on the revenue estimating that we do. We're working on a plan to actually do that and bring them in and have their input into what we're doing with revenue estimating, because as you know, even though it sounds like you take the assessment for a property and you multiply it by the tax rate to get the tax bill, that's just the very end of the process, and everything that leads up to it is almost as complicated, if not more complicated, than actually trying to figure out income tax revenues, prospective income tax revenues, without having any real data to use, because we're not allowed to have that data.
Okay. Please explain your understanding, your role as it relates to the council.
Sure. This will be really brief. I have always worked collaboratively with council and with our peers in other places, with other departments. I will continue that. Finance has always been very good about working with everybody who is a stakeholder, so I will continue to operate that way.
And I agree with that as well. The county recently passed a law on racial equity and social justice. What measures would you take to advance racial equity and social justice in the department and countywide?
Sure. Well, I think you just confirmed the county's first chief equity officer this morning. I heard it was a standing ovation.
It was. Perhaps you can
nobody
get the same
in finance would ever expect that.
No problem. Yeah, she did a great job in her interview. Go ahead.
I actually looked at her interview. So. But, finance isn't the lead on this. In fact, finance is actually one of the more diverse county agencies in the county. We actually mirror to a large extent the diversity of Montgomery County itself. But we're not the leaders. We're happy to be participants and help Tiffany advance her work and get her office going and do whatever we need to do to make sure that we are compliant and participating and making Montgomery County a better place in that particular way. But we're definitely not the lead on that one.
Thank you. And do you have any conflicts of interest of which the council should be aware?
I do not.
Very good. Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you, Mr. President, and it's great to see you, Mr. Covey. I will have to say that I think that even though Tiffany Ward is amazing and deserved that standing ovation, part of it had to do with the fact that this was a historic
yeah.
appointment as well. So please don't feel bad if we don't do a standing ovation for you. But you're up there as top tier when it comes to standing ovations. Let me just say that I feel like I've had a very interesting front row view of the finance team. Because since I started chairing what used to be the MFP committee and started going to New York for the rating agency meetings, it was always an amazing opportunity to see firsthand the caliber and the team approach that always helped us and really, truly represented us very well, and that hasn't changed. And I think with you leading the team this last time around, it was something that I'll be honest, I was a little worried about what team is it going to be like. And then, when we went and you were leading it and it didn't skip a beat. And I felt like that was really important because those relationships with the rating agencies are important. And it's important to go there and to be in person and for them to see the continuity. So, I really appreciated the way that you handled that, and I'm sure how you will continue to lead. You did touch upon some of the areas that you guys are looking at right now in terms of, for example, reserves. As you know, the Government Operations Committee, with the urging and support of the entire council, has said that we're also going to embark in looking at a lot of these different policies, and we've started working with you guys on that. So I just want to, reemphasize how important it is for us to be informed as you are looking at different things. Maybe not necessarily a formal, update every 2 weeks or anything, but at least through Gene Smith, who is our able person there, staff member, just so that we can have a flow of information and we can be at the, on the same page. That is critical, as I said earlier, because every time we go to the rating agencies, the idea and what we really are there to do is to show that we're on the same page. So, the earlier that we are involved, again, especially the GO committee, and maybe some potential changes to whatever kind of fiscal policy, it's really important that we work together so that we don't have any surprises or anything like that. So I guess my next question, well, this was a comment, but my next question really has to do with capacity. So, we did launch the public campaign finance program. David Crow was amazing. I don't know how he was able to manage this whole thing. We have things like the Small Business Impact Assistance Bill. I mean, we have a lot of different things the finance has to do, in addition to, of course, giving us the information regarding fiscal, impact statements and things of that nature. We're going to be doing budget very soon. So tell me a little bit about your take on the capacity piece, because I feel very strongly that, one thing is to streamline processes and try to find savings. Another is to recognize where there might be a capacity gap, and that could have, unintended consequences for our work. So talk to me a little bit about what is your take, and, do you believe that perhaps there might be opportunities for strengthening the capacity so that we can have the information, and people like David Crow, whenever it comes time for another cycle, he's not there on his own doing all of this type of work plus everything else that he's doing.
Certainly, yes. I think right now with what we have the capacity, but the state is changing the public election laws, and we are going to have to request additional staff to handle it. I believe that they're thinking about actually adding school board elections also to public election fund. So we are in a place right now where the executive is actually the one who makes the calls on these things. If the executive uses the public election fund, it does beg the question of where we should be sort of making some of the decisions and who should be making them. But right now, as of today, we are staffed. We need probably half a body, half a position to fully operationalize the public election fund for the future. But if the changes that David is aware of that are cycling through the General Assembly right now are made, we're going to need probably at least one more person. Not necessarily full-time equivalent person, but we'll need at least one full FTE in order to pull that off.
And in terms of any other type of capacity needs, so in order for us to get fiscal impact statements on time, or these other types of programs that are managed through finance, like the Small Business Impact Assistance Program and things like that? Do you think you have the capacity to do those with fidelity?
Yeah, I think without any expansions, we're fine. If we're going to expand, it depends on how we expand and to what extent we expand. But we're staffed well on the economic development side right now. Where we're not really staffed well is on tax credits. When you adopted the elderly individual military retiree tax credit a few years ago, it was a tax credit that several thousand elderly folks applied for, and it is a paper-based process because folks did not want to do it electronically. And we made it available electronically and by paper, and over 90% of the people took paper. So we're managing through the paper. It's one of the things that we have used RPA, robotic process automation, to manage, but it's still very unwieldy because we still have to start from paper. So, if you're thinking about adding new property tax credits in the future, we have one property tax credit administrator who administers 20 or 21 tax credit programs. I think he's at capacity, and I think we're at capacity right now for that. In fact, he takes help from other people as necessary throughout the year, but we're technically a little over capacity on that. But for economic development, we're okay right now, and I'm not aware of anything new that's coming down that we haven't already seen, and I wouldn't be worried too much about having the human ability to do this. We have an excellent staff who works on this, and they're extraordinarily efficient.
Great. So in closing, all I can say also is, going back to the issue of racial equity and social justice, but really thinking about how we serve, how our number one priority is to serve our residents. It is important that this department also have capacity, whether it's language capacity, cultural proficiency, et cetera, because as you were just describing, for example, with the elderly that were applying, there is going to be that kind of interaction with the public, and there are a lot of people who may not be able to navigate things appropriately. So I know that we just appointed Tiffany, but we can't just say, well, Tiffany will take care of it. We need to start thinking about, if we are going to interact with the public, we'll be forward-facing. Any opportunity that exists to strengthen that kind of, capacity with the department, and will also be very helpful.
Okay, that sounds really good. I'd just say, I'm not sure anybody here would be aware of it, but the Treasury Division, which actually does all the taxes and does all the direct customer service when people come into the cashier windows or to the transfer office, Treasury is actually one of the most diverse parts of finance, which is a pretty diverse department within the county. And we have people, we have like 8 people who have the language proficiency in 6 or 7 different languages. We actually can answer almost everybody's questions, or at least take their questions and eventually find answers for them already, in Treasury anyway.
That's awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you, Council President. Thank you to our Government Operations and Fiscal Policy Chair, Councilmember Navarro, for all the work that both of you have done. And I can attest as the newbie coming into this of the collaborative relationship with you. And I, for one, I know we've talked at length, but really look forward to moving forward with the 10-year fiscal plan and some of the other structural changes that we all recognize we need to make. And I appreciate the robust conversation we had the other day about your plan to move forward. We talked a little bit about this privately. I was hoping you could raise it publicly. You mentioned the work that you're doing, I think the pioneering work that you're doing in the department, and that you have helped to spearhead with the robotic process automation. Could you just talk quickly about how you see that moving forward in terms of expanding that within the department to find efficiencies, to save costs? Because I think it speaks directly to the questions that Councilmember Navarro was asking in terms of capacity.
Sure.
And then also about how that could help the broader government operations and any plans there of, I know you've gone to Mako and shared this with other similar departments, but I think there's some lessons learned potentially for other departments within county government that have similar processing needs?
Sure. I mean, one of the things, well, first of all, I'd like to say that I'm the lead on that, but Jason Abuan, who is our IT chief, is the lead. And Jason has been amazingly astute at what might work and what might not work. When we started this a few years ago, we were working with a software provider that was one of the only ones that did this. And one of the more complicated things that we do is tax refunds, property tax refunds. And one of the issues that makes it really complicated is determining what the extent of the refund is and making sure that it's actually correct. It's not actually that simple to do. There's human intervention that is required in order to make a couple of choices when looking at the information provided by the tax system. A few years ago, none of the RPA applications could actually help with that. Over the years, when working with us and understanding what our needs were, they've actually built in the ability to do that type of work. So robotic process automation works for things that are very repetitive. So if you're doing the same thing over and over again, if you are processing 10,000 payroll checks, if you have the same keystrokes every time you do it, if you have a program or an application that can do exactly what you're going to do, but can do it 1,000,000 times faster than you can do, then you've got efficiency right there. And if it's a process that isn't prone to error in that there's no data input part of it, where you're actually taking data and you're actually running a process, and you're finalizing the output of the process, sending it off to like a bank in order to print and mail checks. That is a perfect setup for adding robotic process automation to it. You can literally take a process that takes 2 or 3 hours and turn it into something that, for the humans that are involved, takes a minute. They have to log in. They have to get into the system. They have to click the right buttons. It takes them 10 seconds once they're in the system. And then they're not doing 2 or 3 hours worth of work. They're doing 5 minutes worth of work. And then review comes at the end. Humans always review all of our work. So that would be the same as the current process anyway. We are automating in the not too distant future part of our accounts payable work, which is where all the checks come from in the county. And we've found that one of the things that they do in particular, vendor checks, is a very good candidate for doing this, because there's nothing, there's no intercession by humans that has to occur while you're running your work file. So I know that I've heard that HHS is actually using RPA for some of their work. I'm not sure exactly what they're doing with it, but I keep getting questions and comments from people who went to Mako and saw our booth. I actually didn't go to Mako and see it. And I know that GFOA and MDGFOA have asked us to present the same work or similar work, because we're actually doing a lot more. We have a lot more automated processes than we did last August. But those are the main ones right now. Elderly individual military retiree tax credit is probably 75% automated. 25% is the paper part of it, where you actually have to handle paper. The tax refunds, they're about 50% automated so far, because there's still types of refunds that we can't figure out how to automate them yet. We're working hard on that. And we haven't yet done the accounts payable process yet. That's actually one we identified about 2 weeks ago in a meeting, where we're talking about what happens and how it works. And two of us at the same time said, RPA, a good candidate. Let's put that on the list. But Jason Abuan has a list of over a dozen items that he is using, or he is considering for RPA. There's a couple of more things in the controller's office that they're already working on.
I'm excited. I'm bullish on it, and I can't wait to see, not only in your department, but across county government as a way to do more with less as we try to get more and more sophisticated and take on more and more responsibilities. Well, I appreciate that, and I will save the rest of my questions for future briefings should this work out for you in the Government Operations Committee, and I feel confident in you and the Council President and the GO Chair going and representing us at the rating agency, so thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Albernoz.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mike, our paths have crossed many times over the last 13 years, and I've always been impressed by your problem-solving skills, your ability to work in teams, I'm standing up straight, your ability to really reach out and think creatively on how to address some of our most challenging, problems in the county. We're going to be tested. We already are in terms of fiscal responsibility moving forward. And so I feel comfortable with you at the helm, and I think you'll do a great job. You've been doing it for almost a year now, so further evidence that you're going to do a great job. I also really appreciate your candor in responding to Councilmember Navarro's question with regards to capacity. Our central office departments are so critical to ensuring that we have a high-functioning government, and sometimes are not given the same light as other agencies in terms of the need that's out there. And we have to have the infrastructure in place for us to be able to do everything else that we need to do as a county government. And I know your folks work hard and they're extraordinarily efficient, but we have to put everybody in the best position to succeed. So I look forward to supporting your nomination and look forward to working with you. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Mr. President. And Mike, it's good to see you again. Thanks for taking the time to meet and work with us on a number of initiatives. I was really happy to see your first answer to question 2 about important issues being a look at all the fiscal policies. I think many of us who were just completed our first year on the council are eager to review and dust off some things that maybe have dust on them and look at how we can do things better in the 21st century. And I think this is a good time with our able Government Operations Committee Chair and the whole team. I would just add that as you're providing the updates that Councilmember Navarro mentioned, I think there's many of us who have interest here on the council to know what you're taking a look at, and so whatever form you see fit, emails, check-ins regularly, I think we're eager to know. And along those lines, you and I discussed in our private meeting, I mentioned I was going to mention this, that the ability for our staff, and Gene Smith is in the audience here, to be able to manipulate and access and run scenarios on a whole range of things could potentially be strengthened. And I appreciate, I want to give you an opportunity, your willingness to continue to partner and look into additional technological advances maybe that could help us do that. Is that something that consistent with our conversation?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, we talked specifically about access to the tax system. And I was thinking about it after we spoke. I haven't been over there in about a year. So sometimes I forget that the tax assessment system, which is sort of the front end of the actual tax system, which is called Munis, is the system, TAS, or tax assessment system, is the system that actually takes the assessment data from the SDAT files, the State Department of Assessments and Taxation files, and parses it out so that the Munis system, the actual tax billing and collection system, can use it. And the tax assessment system takes the entirety of the state data, which is, as I said yesterday, over 400 fields, and sends to the Munis system the fields that Munis uses in order to do tax billing and collections. So when we're asked questions, oftentimes we're asked questions about things like square footage of properties. That information is actually not information that is used for billing because it's not necessary for billing. So when we're looking at things like that, we're actually looking at the tax assessment system, not at the Munis system. So we're going to look into actually providing access to the TAS system, or providing points of contact actually that can actually help get the information really quickly. Because as I noted the other day, the the 417 odd fields in the assessment data have a lot of field names that look alike, and it's really difficult to tell what everything is, and sometimes it's not even right when you're looking at a particular one. If something went wrong at SSTAT, it doesn't happen that often. It happens every once in a while.
Even the seasoned veteran as yourself needs to ask a question sometimes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we ask SSTAT questions all the time about the data that is in TAS that came from their assessment system, and they're really good about answering those. And we'd end up putting Mr. Smith or whoever else from council staff would be interested in having this type of access. We would have to put them in touch with SSTAT also so they could ask questions. So we'll look into that, and we'll look into it with SSTAT also.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much, and I look forward to supporting you and working with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Glass.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wasn't planning on speaking because everything that's been said was well stated. But upon this last line of questioning from my colleague, Councilmember Jawando, I just wanted to ask your assessment of our assessment policies here. How do you think they are?
You're asking about how Maryland does assessments. Maryland does.
You can answer that question too.
No. I mean,
That's how we do it.
the county doesn't do assessments. We just use the assessments provided by SSTAT.
That's correct.
And we bill using those estimates. If your question is.
So what is
about-
your assessment of that procedure?
Well, that works just fine. If the question is about the assessment process, I'm honestly not an expert on the assessment process. We do the tax side of it. We look at assessments and note when they seem to be out of whack, and we appeal assessments every year. In fact, we appeal them as of the date of finality. The county governments have 45 days. In fact, under county law, we're required to appeal assessments that look out of whack. And we do that every year. In fact, we sent our file, I think, on February 7th or February 8th, because that was the 45th day. So we appeal assessments every year. We work with SSTAT to cull the herd of assessment appeals that we initially provide, if you will. We appeal quite a few assessments. Not all of them are really worthy of appeal. And SSTAT actually works with us hat in hand to make sure that we've got the right ones in hand. Oftentimes, especially with commercial properties, in fact, usually with commercial properties, the assessment should be based on the income generation of the property. And SSTAT doesn't always have income generation information until the assessment comes out, goes to the property owner, the commercial property owner in this case, and the commercial property owner says, whoa, that's way too high. And then they appeal their assessment. And when they appeal their assessment, normally they're going to appeal it by saying, oh, well, this property doesn't generate near the amount of income that would be required in order to have an assessment that high. And SSTAT actually will start the hearing process. The first level appeal is always with the supervisor of assessments, and then it goes from there to the Property Tax Assessment Appeals Board, Maryland Tax Court, Circuit Court, Court of Special Appeals, on and upward. So during that process, we've appealed, a couple hundred different assessments, and SSTAT goes through the list because we send it to them to start the appeal process on our side, and they might call us on some of the properties, and they might explain to us why they are or are not a good candidate for an appeal, because they may actually have other information about the value of the property that isn't that we're not privy to, actually.
Let me last question I'll ask, but let me flip your scenario. You talked about the number of instances where people have appealed because their assessment has been too high. How many appeals do we get for people with too low assessments?
I would say, just a wild guess, 0.
And so if that's the people, and right, that would make sense.
Yeah.
What percentage do you think are underassessed?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, the SDAT actually has an annual report. It's an excellent report if you ever want to look at it. I think they call it the annual report, and they're in the 70s right now, the 75th or something like that. It actually talks about appeals. It actually talks about how close to fair market value a jurisdiction's property happens to be. And they aim for 95% or so. I think we're in the low to mid-90s right now. So the assessment value or assessed value or tax value is supposed to approximate fair market or full cash value, which are actually the same concept in state law. But it can't really ever get to 100%. There's always, the way they do assessments would not even allow them to get to 100%. I think their metric for success is to get it into the 90s. We appreciate it when it gets close to 100, but it's usually in the mid-90s for us.
That's an aggregate number, and I think
Yes.
if you and I recall that is a correct guesstimate, which essentially what all of this kind of is, really. But when you drill down a little bit further, the estimates vary much more widely.
Yes, that's
You're
true.
nodding.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and that's part of that is a product of the fact that there are always real estate transactions that are not like other real estate transactions. We have people in the county who will take a property that probably has a fair market value of $1 million to $2 million, and they'll pay $3 million to $5 million for it, and they'll re-improve the property, and they'll sell it for $8 million, and they'll still net a nice hefty profit. So that, if you buy a $1 million to $2 million property for $3 to $4 million, the question is what should the assessors do about that particular property's value? It really isn't necessarily $3 to $4 million, because for especially residential real property, the valuation is based on comparable properties. It's not based on income. There's no income being generated for most residential real properties. So it's how SDAT deals with those outliers that or the fact that there is outliers means that there's variance within the entirety of the assessment roll or the assessment record. So it's a big part of the reason for it.
And that was why I asked the very first question that
Sure.
I did about how you feel the process is and how our partnerships with SDAT are. And this is a conversation that we will continue far after you are confirmed into this role. So thank you very much.
Sure, you're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Rice.
Hey, Mike. So I don't want to belabor this, but Councilmember Glass brings up a very important point. You know my service with Maryland Association of Counties, and we've had a number of instances in which bills have come across looking at transferring responsibility from SDAT to local, and whether or not that would actually benefit us in being more accurate, being able to have a better finger on the pulse when it comes to understanding what our properties are and what their true valuations should be. Where are you in the sense of where something like that would be? Obviously understanding that it would require much more capacity from your office, so there would have to be money that supports SDAT that would have to flow to local jurisdictions. But if that were to happen, would that be something that you would support as a positive direction for us to go in terms of addressing some of the challenges we see? And this is actually pretty important, because it is one of the things within Department of Finance that I think amongst our constituents, they have the most of that sort of kind of interaction with you guys is really on that level. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
Sure. I think it's worth investigating, if nothing else. I mean, up until the mid-'70s, late '70s, assessments and the tax side were all done locally. And the Maryland General Assembly changed that, I think, in 75 or 76, 77, somewhere along those lines, and started the Department of, it actually may have been slightly later than that, and they instituted the Department of Assessments and Taxation to have a statewide entity do the assessments because of mis and malfeasance among some of the counties. There was more than just a reputation for giving sweetheart assessments to your friends and neighbors and family in some places, supposedly. So that's why, that's, I think, the motivating factor for the fact that we have an unusual system in the United States. We have a state assessor and we have only local taxing authorities. So I think it's worth looking at. It does beg the question of whether it would be a cost saver or not in the long run. I know for a fact that the local ESTAT office, the Montgomery County office, has had a hard time staffing over the last several years. They don't have, as you all know, because you've already seen the memo, they're looking for a new state supervisor right now. I don't think we could replicate what they do for what we and the state spend on the ESTAT staff right now. I don't think we could start off by replicating that necessarily. So I wouldn't want to be too optimistic on that. But I think it's worth considering. I don't know that it would be a good idea to bring it down to the county level. It might be. I don't think you'd necessarily want the assessment role to be in the same department with the tax role. You might want a different department to do that. Not that I, wouldn't like to have a larger finance department, but really what I'd rather like to do is have an efficient operation that actually makes sense, has proper controls in place, and that everybody can be confident works properly. So I think having a good deal of separation between the assessment side and the tax side, it makes an awful lot of sense.
Mike, and that is the reason why I think we're very fortunate to have you as our Director of Finance. Answers like that are very comprehensive and really analyze both sides of the issue, I think, are the reason why I think we'll find ourselves in good hands with you. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Vice President Hooker.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mike, congratulations, and echo everything my colleagues have said about our confidence in you. On your last point, we probably have a higher pay scale than the state agency as well.
I wasn't going to say that.
Okay. If it's like every other department, but
Mr. Friedson and I talked about this recently.
So that'd be another reason not to assume any cost savings.
Too soon, too soon.
Yes.
So just two quick things. One is, and this, I can't tell whether this is entirely optics or this is actually a substantive question about support for our local small businesses, but we had some complaints from taxpayers who don't like sending their check to Pennsylvania. And there was some soft commitment, I thought, to either set up at least a mailbox here or a real Montgomery company that could accept payments. Do you have any progress?
We used to do that, and we could, but it actually adds a day to the whole process.
Why?
We used to have them go to, because they would have to go to Gaithersburg. They used to go to Gaithersburg. Gaithersburg was just a mail drop, and then somebody would go to Gaithersburg, the bank that we deal with, pick them up and send them to Philadelphia for actual processing. So, we could do a local mail. It would just add to the cost, and it would add a day.
Okay.
And it might make people who really get the payments in on time. Because remember, property tax payments are due on September 30th or before, and then on December 31st or before. So if people are used to sending them out the 24th of December, and they get to us on December 31st, that's great. If they now have an extra day or two added, they're going to send them out on the 24th, and then we're not going to get them on time, and that's going to cause some consternation.
Okay, very helpful.
Okay.
And then second, since you brought up late September, you and I spoke on a Friday evening. You were nice enough to call me back because I had a large constituent taxpayer who went to the office to engage in what he considered a proud American tradition of submitting his taxes personally. And the office at the time was understaffed. I don't know if there were vacancies or sick leave or whatever, but he reported angry constituents, a long line, and then an inability to generate a receipt for the taxes he was paying. And then he sent me the letter that you all were nice enough to send him saying, due to who it may concern, due to the high volume and staff shortages, we will honor your September payment that you dropped off in the office today. We'll call you when your receipts are ready to be picked up. And then he was additionally a little annoyed that he had to go then pick up the receipt manually as well. You're a very customer-facing, public-facing office, and I just want to echo what all my colleagues have said about we want very high-level customer service. You do too, and especially since Mr. Klein's here too, I just want you to feel like you need to come to us, if there's contract staff shortages, merit staff shortages, whatever, because we don't want that sort of scenario to get reported to us, as nice as you were to call me back on a Friday night. Do you have anything to...
No, I mean, it was,
so?
for argument's sake, that taxpayer's CFO, because these were all business
Right.
taxes, had actually been working with our staff sort of behind the scenes and knew exactly when things were going to be coming out, and knows actually when you drop off dozens of tax payments within a day or two of the 30th of September, that if the lines are long, we ask that you just leave them with us, and we'll provide a receipt, and it'll be available within a couple days. And we usually give people the option of we can mail them to them or they can come and pick them up. In this particular case, this company usually comes and picks them up in person. So I think there was a little miscommunication that was probably partially our fault also.
He claimed he never had seen that scenario before and that he drops it off every year, multiple ones at the same time. But regardless, I just want you to feel like, yeah, please come to us.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
We want a strong customer service focus. Thank you.
I very much appreciate that. Thanks.
Thank you, Mike. I look forward to voting for you as well, as we had the conversation in the office, and you'll be hearing from us, I guess, next week. So thank you for your interview.
Thank you very much.
The next item that we have is a proposed closed session to consider a matter that concerns a proposal for a business or industrial organization to locate, expand, or remain in the state pursuant to Maryland Code General Provisions, Article 3-305, subsection B4. The topic is a specific business locating in the county. Do we have a motion? And Councilmember Rice and Councilmember Friedson seconded it. All those in favor, please raise your hand. It is unanimous by those. It is unanimous. Thank you very much. We will have our closed session next door in the conference room. We are adjourned. And for those of you who are here for the work session in this room, it's the Fed committee. Hopefully we will not be very long in our closed session. We're hoping less than 15 minutes, but we will. Those are always a good if in our part. Thank you very much.